In the half-light before memory, there is a stone pressed deep into the earth, its surface worn smooth by time rather than hands. Dust rests in its fractures. When you imagine touching it, it is cold, patient, and utterly indifferent to centuries. Nothing moves around it, no wind, no voice, only the quiet pressure of weight and age. This is how deep time announces itself, not with spectacle, but with stillness. You're not here by accident. You are drawn by a rhythm older than history, a pulse that moves beneath calendars and names. Long before cities, before writing, before even the idea of progress, this rhythm shaped rise and collapse with equal calm. Memory does not live only in minds. It settles into stone, into ash, into the silent layers beneath our feet. You felt it before you understood it, and that is why you are listening now. What if civilization is not a straight line, but a circle traced and retraced across the planet? What if intelligence does not belong to one moment, one species, one shadow, standing at the end of evolution? Imagine worlds before ours, ancient and unfamiliar learning, building, forgetting, and turning back into dust. Imagine memory surviving not as monuments, but as faint distortions in the rock echoes pressed into the chemistry of the earth itself. We inherit a world already layered with loss. Beneath every road is older ground. Beneath every story is another one erased. The past is not empty, it is quiet, and quiet things endure longer than noise. When we mistake silence for absence, we lose the ability to recognize warning. Stone remembers even when we do not. Stay with me, let's drift a little deeper. Night arrives without ceremony. It does not announce itself with sound or motion, only with a gradual thickening of air, as though the world has decided to breathe more slowly. In the deep forest, humidity gathers on leaves and bark, turning every surface into a quiet reservoir of touch. The temperature is warm but restrained, held in balance by shade and moisture. Nothing here feels new. Everything feels rehearsed, as if the forest has performed this exact night countless times before, and will do so countless times again. The ground beneath is not soil in the simple sense. It is memory compacted into texture. Layers of fallen life compressed by years, softened by water, stitched together by roots, that do not ask permission before passing through. When imagined fingers brush against it, it yields gently, then resists, reminding you that softness is only a temporary state. Beneath softness lies pressure. Beneath pressure lies stone. The forest stands not on earth but on accumulated time. Sound behaves differently here. Insects hum, but their noise does not demand attention. It exists as continuity rather than interruption, a low rhythmic proof that life is still circulating energy through small bodies. Drops of water fall from leaves at irregular intervals, each one precise, each one final. When it strikes the ground, it disappears completely. No echo, no trace. The forest absorbs everything. Heat lingers like an afterthought. It is not produced any more, only remembered. The air carries it the way sediment carries warmth long after burial. This is how the planet stores experience not in consciousness, but in chemistry and structure. Temperature is not a condition, it is a record. And records here are written slowly without language. As attention drifts downward, the forest thins into darkness, and warmth begins to retreat. The imagined descent into the ocean does not feel like movement, but like surrender. Water closes around perception, thick and heavy, stripping away distance. Light fades not abruptly but reluctantly, losing strength layer by layer until colour itself becomes unnecessary. Blue dissolves first, then green, then everything. Pressure arrives gradually. It does not strike, it accumulates. Each metre downward adds weight that cannot be negotiated with. The body, if there were one, would compress inward, adjusting without protest. Thought does the same. Complexity simplifies under pressure. Only essential structures remain. This is how depth teaches restraint. The seafloor does not reveal itself suddenly. It emerges through hints, a slight change in texture, a subtle resistance beneath drifting sediment. Fine particles fall constantly, a snow of pulverized continent shells, organic remains, volcanic ash. Each grain carries a story that has already ended. Together they form a surface that is never still yet never dramatic. This is the archive of Earth, written in dust too small to read quickly. Bioluminescence flickers in brief restrained pulses. Not illumination, but acknowledgement. Life here does not announce itself. It signals briefly, then returns to darkness. These flashes resemble distant stars, but they belong to organisms adapted to silence rather than spectacle. Energy is conserved. Excess is dangerous. Nothing here assumes permanence. Erosion is time thinking. Water does not destroy with intention. It moves because movement is the most efficient way to remember shape. Mountains are not defeated by rivers. They are translated. Edges soften, heights become plains. What once stood tall eventually lies flat, then disappears into circulation. The ocean floor is not the end of things. It is the beginning of redistribution. Above storms rage unnoticed. Waves break and reformed tides rise and fall, but their violence never reaches this depth. Here motion is transmitted only as pressure, waves slow and distant like a heartbeat heard through stone walls. The planet's surface is dramatic because it is young. The deep is calm because it is old. Cold arrives as a discipline rather than a shock. As the scene shifts again, water thickens into ice, and movement slows to the edge of stillness. The temperature here enforces obedience. Molecules align, vibrations quiet. Sound sharpens, then fades. Snow compresses beneath imagined weight, emitting a brittle whisper that feels older than speech. Ice teaches silence by example. Glaciers are not frozen rivers. They are memory engines. They advance with patience so absolute it resembles stillness. Millimetre by millimetre they press against stone, grinding it into powder finer than sand. Beneath their mass bedrock fractures, without protest. Resistance is irrelevant here. Time wins not by speed, but by consistency. Under the ice the world is dim and muted. Colours are reduced to variations of absence. Yet this is not emptiness. It is compression. Information is stored in pressure lines, in striations carved into stone, in mineral alignments altered by weight. The glacier writes without ink. Its language is deformation. Above the ice stretches a sky so clear it feels hollow. Stars burn far beyond scale, indifferent to what unfolds below them. Their light arrives softened by distance and delay, ancient by the time it touches perception. To look upward is to look backward. To look downward is to look deeper. Both directions remove certainty. Across forest, ocean and ice, a single atmosphere persists. It is not defined by oxygen or temperature alone, but by indifference. The Earth does not favour complexity or simplicity. It favours balance. When imbalance accumulates, the system adjusts. Adjustment is not moral, it is mechanical. Night reveals this because it strips away distraction. In darkness, the senses reorganize. Texture replaces colour. Weight replaces motion. Time replaces urgency. You begin to understand how fragile surface impressions truly are. A footprint in mud survives moments. A footprint in ash survives hours. A footprint in stone survives only because stone itself is slow to forget. Most things are not meant to be remembered. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. Atmosphere is not just air. It is context. It determines how long heat lingers, how sound travels, how memory fades. At night, air cools and settles into layers, each one distinct, each one holding a slightly different history. Smells persist longer. Silence grows heavier. Even thought begins to stretch, loosening its grip on immediacy. This is the environment intelligence would always have faced regardless of when it emerged. Not a welcoming world, not a hostile one, but a neutral one. Forests reclaim, oceans dissolve, ice erases. The planet does not oppose structures. It simply refuses to preserve them indefinitely. To exist here is to accept impermanence as a condition, not a failure. Night encourages acceptance. Without light, ambition quiets. Scale becomes relative. A city shrinks to a moment. A civilization compresses into a layer. What felt immense during the day becomes thin when measured against stone and sediment. The Earth has never promised continuity. It offers cycles instead. When imbalance grows, the planet exhales. That exhale may feel catastrophic to those caught within it, but it is also correction. Fire, flood, ice, drought. These are not punishments. They are responses. The atmosphere does not judge, it adjusts. Remaining suspended in this imagined stillness atmosphere becomes less about place and more about condition. Cool, dense, patient. This is the medium in which forgotten histories dissolve without drama. Evidence does not vanish violently. It is diluted, redistributed, transformed, until it resembles something else entirely. The night does not conceal the past. It prepares it to fade, and in that fading pattern survive longer than details ever could. This is the air in which the next movement must begin, where silence is not absence but readiness. Evidence does not arrive as revelation. It settles. It drifts downward like fine sediment in still water, invisible in the moment of descent, undeniable, only after time has allowed it to accumulate. In geology, truth is not announced by a single stone or measurement, but by repetition so quiet it is often mistaken for background noise. Layers do not argue, they wait. What we call evidence is simply what remains after the planet has finished erasing everything else. Stone remembers pressure more faithfully than intention. When minerals align under heat, when crystals stretch and fracture, they record conditions without caring what caused them. A mountain does not know why it rose. It only knows that it was compressed. In the same way, sediments do not preserve stories. They preserve outcomes. This distinction matters because outcomes survive long after motives dissolve into ash. The geological record is often imagined as an archive shelves of neatly ordered time waiting to be consulted. In reality, it's close to a shoreline after a storm. Fragments remain, but the arrangement is incomplete, disturbed, rearranged by forces that had no interest in preservation. What survives is what happened to be buried, quickly shielded by chemistry, spared by chance. The absence of something does not mean it never existed. It means it was not protected. Evidence accumulates slowly because the Earth works slowly. Radiometric clocks tick with indifferent patience. Isotopes decay at rates that cannot be hurried or delayed by belief. Uranium becomes lead. Potassium becomes argon. These transformations are steady, silent, and immune to narrative. When measured carefully, they tell us not what happened, but when matter last changed its state. Time is encoded in decay, not memory. In the quiet laboratories where rocks are ground into powder and dissolved into solution, nothing dramatic occurs. A mass spectrometer hums softly. A graph appears. A ratio shifts by a fraction. This is how deep time reveals itself, not through spectacle but through consistency. When multiple methods converge on the same age, confidence grows not because the story is satisfying, but because the numbers agree. The Earth's surface is deceptive because it is young. Wind, water, and biology constantly rewrite it. The deeper record lies beneath in sediments compressed into stone in ocean floors that archive climate cycles in ice cores that trap ancient atmospheres like insects in amber. These are not monuments. They are residues. They tell us what the planet was breathing, not what it was thinking. Ice cores offer a particularly intimate form of evidence. Layer by layer, snowfall compacts into ice, trapping tiny bubbles of air that once belonged to ancient skies. When extracted and analysed, these bubbles reveal concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. The air itself becomes a fossil. We can measure how warm the planet was, how cold it became, how abruptly it changed its mind. The rhythm is unmistakable. Glacial periods arrive, linger, then retreat. Warm intervals bloom, then fade. These cycles repeat with variations, like a melody altered slightly with each performance. Evidence here does not argue for linear progress. It argues for oscillation. The planet inhales. The planet exhales. Complexity expands. Complexity contracts. Ocean sediments extend this rhythm further back, far beyond the reach of ice. Microscopic shells of plankton rain down through water columns accumulating on the seafloor. Their composition reflects the temperature and chemistry of the oceans at the time they lived. By drilling deep into these layers, scientists reconstruct climates tens of millions of years old. Warm periods, cold snaps, Sudden disruptions, long recoveries. Evidence does not care whether these changes were convenient for life. It simply records that they happened. The fossil record mirrors this indifference. Species appear, diversify, dominate, then vanish. Most leave no descendants, many leave only partial remains. Entire ecosystems rise and fall without leaving a clear explanation. Extinction is not an anomaly, it is the default outcome. This matters because intelligence, if it arises, would not be exempt from these rules. The Earth has no category for minds, it only registers mass chemistry and energy flow. If a thinking species altered its environment, those alterations would be recorded not as intention, but as change. A shift in isotopes, an anomaly in sediment, a disruption in cycles that otherwise move predictably. Modern science already uses such signals to define our own moment. The burning of fossil fuels releases carbon with a distinct isotopic signature. Nitrogen cycles are altered by agriculture. Synthetic compounds appear in soils and oceans. Radioactive isotopes mark nuclear activity. These traces are not chosen, they are consequences. They form a thin layer, a brief punctuation in the geological sentence. When projected into deep time, these signatures do not endure indefinitely. They blur, they decay, they are overwritten by later processes. But for a time they exist, and their existence proves something important. A technological civilization does not need to leave ruins to leave evidence. It only needs to change the chemistry of its world faster than natural systems usually allow. The challenge lies in interpretation. Evidence does not label itself. A carbon spike can be volcanic, it can be biological, it can be something else entirely. Without context, signals remain ambiguous. This ambiguity is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it is honesty. The planet provides data, not explanations. Over geological timescales, the record becomes thinner, not because less happened, but because less survived. Plate tectonics recycle crust. Ocean floors are subducted and melted. Mountains erode into basins that later become mountains again. Each cycle erases detail while preserving pattern. The older the layer, the more abstract its message becomes. This abstraction is where discomfort begins. We prefer evidence that points clearly to a cause. A crater implies an impact. A skeleton implies an organism. But many signals do not point so cleanly. Rapid warming events appear without obvious triggers. Chemical disruptions precede known catastrophes. Patterns emerge that suggest sudden change rather than gradual drift. Science responds cautiously as it should. Multiple hypotheses are proposed. Volcanism, methane release, ocean circulation shifts. Each explanation fits some data strains others. None fully resolve the pattern. The evidence remains waiting. It does not demand a conclusion. It tolerates uncertainty. In this waiting lies the tension. Evidence accumulates whether or not we are comfortable with its implications. Each anomaly added to the record increases complexity. Complexity does not negate understanding, but it resists simplification. The more we learn, the less linear the story becomes. Deep time does not move in straight lines. It folds. There is a temptation to believe that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This phrase is often repeated, rarely examined. All evidence is ordinary to the Earth. It is only extraordinary to us because it challenges expectation. A sudden chemical spike is not extraordinary to geology. It is simply data. What makes it uncomfortable is the story it threatens to interrupt. The evidence for ancient climates, ancient extinctions, ancient disruptions is robust and widely accepted. The hesitation arises when these same data are allowed to suggest unfamiliar possibilities. Evidence itself does not forbid such thinking. Interpretation does, and interpretation is shaped by what we believe is possible. The deeper one goes into the record, the more humility is required. Certainty fades with depth. Not because knowledge fails, but because resolution decreases. This is not a flaw. It is a property of time. Memory erodes, signals blur. What remains are gradients rather than edges, yet gradients still speak. A sudden shift remains sudden even when details are lost. A disruption remains a disruption even when its cause is debated. Evidence tells us that the Earth has experienced moments of rapid transformation, that cannot be easily reduced to slow, predictable processes. Something changes. The system responds. Life adapts or vanishes. This is the foundation upon which all further questions must rest. Not speculation, not belief, but accumulated observation. The planet has changed its state many times. The changes have been abrupt. The recovery has been slow. Complexity has risen and fallen repeatedly. None of this is controversial. It is written into stone. If intelligence were to arise within such a system, it would not exist outside these rhythms. It would be subject to the same pressures, the same resets, the same indifference. Its evidence would be subtle, not because it was insignificant, but because time is thorough. Evidence would not announce itself as a city or a machine. It would whisper as a deviation, a pattern slightly out of alignment. The atmosphere of evidence is therefore one of restraint. It does not shout. It accumulates. It waits for interpretation without demanding it. Like sediment at the bottom of a quiet sea, it thickens layer by layer, patient indifferent to the stories we tell above it. And, as it thickens, it prepares the ground for the next realization where evidence ceases to fit comfortably, and anomaly begins to emerge. Anomalies do not arrive loudly. They enter the record like hairline fractures in stone invisible, until pressure reveals them. At first they resemble error, a misread instrument, a contaminated sample, a calculation performed too quickly or too slowly. Science expects this and accounts for it. The anomaly survives only when repetition refuses to erase it. In the language of geology, most things fit. Layers align. Ages converge. Signals agree with intolerances. This coherence builds trust. It allows models to stand upright, balanced on countless confirmations. An anomaly is dangerous not because it contradicts everything, but because it contradicts just enough. It occupies the space where certainty thins. The first response is always caution. Measurements are repeated, instruments recalibrated, samples discarded and recollected. This is not denial. It is discipline. The system prefers stability because stability allows understanding to accumulate. But when an anomaly persists through correction, it changes character. It stops being noise and becomes texture. A carbon isotope spike that appears too abruptly. A temperature rise that precedes its proposed cause. A chemical ratio that does not match surrounding layers. Individually, each can be explained. Volcanism, methane release, diagnosis. These explanations are not wrong. They are plausible. But plausibility is not closure. The anomaly begins to feel like a pause in the rhythm. The Earth has a cadence. Gradual warming, gradual cooling, feedback loops that respond predictably. When that cadence is interrupted, attention sharpens. Something moved faster than expected. Something acted before the system was ready. In sediment cores, these interruptions appear as thin lines. Barely visible bands that mark moments when the planet changed its behavior. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum is one such line. A sudden global warming event 56 million years ago. Oceans acidified. Carbon flooded the atmosphere. Life struggled. Recovery took hundreds of thousands of years. The standard explanation points to natural causes, massive methane release from seafloor hydrates, volcanic activity associated with continental rifting. These mechanisms can account for much of what is observed, yet the speed of onset remains uncomfortable. The carbon arrived too quickly. The temperature rose too fast. The anomaly lingers. Another line appears at the Permian-Triassic boundary. The greatest extinction in Earth's history. Over 90% of marine species vanished. Forests collapsed. The oceans became hostile to complex life. Volcanism in Siberia is implicated and the lava flows are real vast beyond imagination. Still, the chemical signals suggest pulses, abrupt shifts that do not align neatly with slow eruption sequences. Anomaly does not mean alternative explanation is correct. It means the current one is incomplete. This distinction is often lost. To acknowledge an anomaly is not to abandon rigor, it is to preserve it. The Earth is under no obligation to behave conveniently. In archaeology, anomalies take a different form, a tool where none should exist, a structure too large for its proposed builders. precision that exceeds available technology, dates that do not fit the timeline. Each case is addressed individually. Contamination, misinterpretation, symbolic exaggeration. Again, these explanations may be valid, but the pattern remains. The anomaly becomes a question of scale. One inconsistency can be dismissed. A cluster demands attention. When anomalies appear across disciplines, across methods, across timescales, they begin to resonate. Not as proof, but as pressure. The pressure asks whether the framework itself might be too narrow. Human cognition is adapted to linearity. Cause precedes effect. Progress accumulates. Complexity increases. The geological record resists this simplicity. It shows repetition. It shows regression. It shows sudden collapse followed by long recovery. The anomaly highlights this resistance. In the lab, anomalies are often smoothed away statistically. Outliers removed to reveal the trend. This is necessary for clarity. But sometimes the outlier is the signal. Sometimes the trend is the illusion. The Earth does not promise neat distributions. Consider the Oklo phenomenon and Gabon. 2 billion years ago, natural nuclear reactions occurred within uranium deposits. This is accepted science. The conditions aligned briefly, allowing sustained fission. It is an anomaly because it appears only once in the record. Unique events make scientists uncomfortable. Nature prefers repetition. The Oklo reactors behaved in ways that resemble engineered systems, controlled reactions, stable waste containment. The official explanation invokes groundwater moderation and geometry. It is elegant. It is also fragile. It requires a precise alignment of conditions that has not been observed elsewhere. The anomaly remains acknowledged but quarantined. In coal seams, reports of manufactured objects embedded in ancient material persist at the edges of documentation. Gold chains, iron vessels, decorated bells. Each story can be challenged. Hoax, misreporting, contamination. And yet the physical context strains these explanations. Coal does not form around modern objects without leaving obvious scars. These anomalies are rarely pursued vigorously, not because they threaten truth, but because they threaten coherence. A timeline is a fragile thing. Once fractured, it cannot be easily repaired. The cost of investigation becomes high. Careers are built on continuity. Frameworks reward stability. An anomaly therefore enters a peculiar state. It is neither accepted nor refuted. It is catalogued. It is explained just enough to reduce urgency. It is placed on a shelf labelled curiosity. Over time, it fades from conversation not because it was resolved, but because attention moved elsewhere. This process is not malicious. It is human. Knowledge systems are conservative by necessity. Without this conservatism, nothing would stand long enough to be understood. But conservatism has a shadow. It filters which questions are worth asking. The Silurian hypothesis emerged from this shadow, not as a claim but as a thought experiment. If an industrial civilization existed millions of years ago, would we be able to detect it? The answer grounded in geology was unsettling, probably not with certainty. Most evidence would erode, chemical signatures would blur, only ambiguous traces would remain. This reframes anomalies. They are no longer expected to look like ruins. They are expected to look like mistakes, like contamination, like coincidences. The anomaly becomes the correct form of evidence in a world that erases. Chemistry becomes the most honest witness. Isotopes do not care about narrative. They record ratios faithfully. When those ratios deviate unexpectedly, something happened. What that something was remains open. Volcano, impact, biology, or something else. The anomaly does not choose. Patterns of nitrogen disruptions, sudden shifts in sulfur cycles, unexplained polymer traces in ancient sediments. Each is addressed individually. Together they suggest repeated moments of rapid environmental change that do not align cleanly with known processes. The anomaly whispers consistency. In biology, anomalies appear as gaps. Long periods where complexity stagnates or declines unexpectedly. Sudden bursts of innovation without clear precursors. The Cambrian explosion remains partially unexplained. Genetic toolkits appear fully formed. Evolution accelerates then slows. These are not violations of theory, they are stress points. Stress points matter because they reveal where assumptions are strongest. We assume intelligence is rare. We assume it progresses toward us. We assume it leaves obvious marks. Anomalies challenge these assumptions quietly. They do not say intelligence existed before humans. They say we do not know enough to be certain it did not. The Earth has had billions of years to experiment. Life arose quickly. Complexity followed. Intelligence defined broadly as information processing and adaptive behavior appears repeatedly in different forms. Octopuses, corvids, cetaceans. Each demonstrates that cognition is not a single path. What if earlier worlds explored paths we no longer recognize? What if their traces do not resemble ours? The anomaly opens this question without answering it. It insists on humility. Night amplifies this insistence. In darkness, the mind is less defensive. Certainty loosens. The anomaly feels less like a threat and more like an invitation. To observe without forcing resolution. To allow the record to remain incomplete. The anomaly is not evidence of a hidden civilization. It is evidence of limitation. Of our limited access to the past. Of our limited imagination when interpreting data filtered by time. It reveals how much of Earth's history is missing, recycled, or compressed beyond recognition. This realization is unsettling because it removes the comfort of finality. The story is not closed. The timeline is not sealed. The past is not fully mapped. Anomalies persist not as errors, but as reminders. They remind us that knowledge grows by tension as much as by confirmation. That understanding deepens when questions outpace answers, that the Earth's memory is fragmentary by design. As this chapter settles, the anomaly does not demand belief. It demands patience. It asks to be held gently without resolution until enough context accumulates. Like a fracture in stone, it does not weaken the structure. It reveals where stress has been applied. In the quiet that follows, one truth remains. If intelligence ever arose before us, its traces would not shout. They would hesitate. They would flicker at the edges of data. They would appear as anomalies waiting for a time when questions were allowed to linger longer than answers. Silence is not empty. It is compressed. In geology, silence appears where layers should exist but do not, where time passed, yet left no readable trace. These gaps are not rare. They are the rule. The Earth erases more than it preserves, and what remains is a biased selection shaped by pressure chemistry and chance. Silence is the default state of deep time. When we imagine the past, we imagine continuity. One layer resting neatly atop another each year, stacked like pages in a book. The reality is far less orderly. Rivers cut through deposits. Oceans dissolve coastlines. Tectonic plates drag surfaces into heat and darkness where memory liquefies. The record is constantly interrupted. What looks like absence is often destruction, followed by replacement. In stratigraphy, these interruptions are called unconformities. They represent missing time, sometimes millions of years erased between two layers that now touch as if nothing happened. An unconformity is a scar where erosion removed entire histories. Life rose and fell during that missing span, yet nothing remains to show it. Silence settles where complexity once lived. The fossil record reflects this violence gently. We speak of gaps of sudden appearances of missing transitions. Species seem to arrive fully formed, persist briefly, then vanish. This is not how evolution works. It is how preservation fails. Soft bodies decay, forests rot, tools corrode. Only under rare conditions does anything survive long enough to be noticed. Silence, therefore, accumulates unevenly. Periods of stability leave thicker records. Periods of upheaval leave almost none. Ironically, the moments when the most happened are often the moments least remembered. Catastrophe destroys its own evidence. Collapse grinds detail into dust and distributes it beyond recognition. In archaeology, silence takes another form. Sites are excavated selectively. Only certain layers are exposed. Only certain interpretations are pursued. Once a narrative stabilizes, questions slow. Funding moves elsewhere. The silence here is not geological but institutional. It is created by focus, not erosion. This silence is not malicious. It emerges from practicality. No field can pursue every anomaly. No institution can reopen every settled question. Over time, what is not actively studied fades into irrelevance. Artifacts are catalogued, stored, forgotten. Not destroyed, simply quieted. Museums embody this silence physically. Vast collections sit in storage unseen by the public, sometimes unseen by scholars. Drawers of objects that do not fit comfortably within existing frameworks wait indefinitely. They are not hidden as secrets. They are hidden by inertia. Silence grows around them naturally. Silence also lives in language. Certain phrases end inquiry without appearing to do so. Natural formation, ritual object, symbolic structure, measurement error. These explanations may be accurate, but they also function as closures. They allow curiosity to rest. They transform uncertainty into calm. In geology, silence deepens with age. The farther back one looks, the thinner the signal becomes. Radiometric methods provide dates but not stories. Chemistry reveals conditions, not intentions. Biology leaves fragments, not behaviours. Intelligence, if it existed, would dissolve faster than bone. Silence is therefore not suspicious. It is expected. The mistake is to treat silence as proof, to assume that because we hear nothing, nothing spoke. Deep time does not preserve voices, preserves echoes, and even those fade. The ocean floor offers a lesson. Most of it is younger than 200 million years. Everything older has been recycled into the mantle. Entire eras have been swallowed. Continents have been erased and rebuilt. Any civilization that existed on those lost surfaces would be gone without trace, not because it was insignificant, but because the process was thorough. Ice cores tell a similar story. They preserve atmospheres for hundreds of thousands of years, then melt flow fracture. Beyond that span, silence resumes. The air of earlier worlds has escaped. Memory diffused into space. No witness remains. Silence also appears in sudden transitions, a chemical shift without a clear cause, a biological collapse without warning. These moments feel like missing chapters. Something happened, but the mechanism is unclear. The record speaks just enough to say change occurred, then falls quiet again. This quiet is unsettling because it resists narrative. Humans seek continuity. We prefer stories that explain beginnings and endings cleanly. Silence denies us that comfort. It reminds us that most of history is inaccessible not because it is forbidden, but because it is gone. In the absence of evidence, imagination rushes in. Myths form. Speculation grows. This is not inherently wrong. Myth often preserves emotional truth when factual detail is lost. But myth also fills silence with certainty, replacing unknowns with symbols. The challenge is to let silence remain silence without rushing to decorate it. Science is trained to be cautious here. Silence cannot be measured directly. It must be inferred. An unconformity suggests erosion. A gap suggests loss. But inference carries uncertainty. The deeper the silence, the wider the uncertainty. This uncertainty is uncomfortable. It undermines confidence. It weakens the feeling that the past is fully mapped. Many resist this discomfort by tightening narratives, by reducing ambiguity. But ambiguity is honest. Silence is part of the data. Consider how quickly modern evidence would fade without maintenance. If humanity vanished, cities would collapse within centuries. Metals would corrode. Plastics would fragment. Within tens of thousands of years, only faint chemical traces would remain. Given millions of years, even those would blur. Silence would settle where noise once dominated. This thought reframes the absence of ancient evidence. It is not surprising that nothing obvious remains. It would be surprising if something did. Silence becomes not a mystery but an expectation. Yet silence does not mean nothing happened. It means whatever happened did not align with preservation. It means the earth continued its processes without regard for memory. It means time finished its work. The danger lies in mistaking silence for simplicity, to believe that because the record is quiet, the past was uneventful. Deep time was not empty. It was active, dynamic, experimental. Silence is not absence of activity, it is absence of witnesses. At night, this truth feels easier to accept. Darkness removes visual reassurance. It trains the mind to listen differently, to feel presence without proof, to accept that some things cannot be retrieved. Silence invites humility. It asks us to acknowledge the limits of our reach. It reminds us that certainty diminishes with depth, that confidence should soften as evidence thins. Silence is not an enemy of knowledge, it is its boundary. As this chapter settles, the silence does not demand interpretation. It asks for patience. It prepares the ground for imagination grounded in restraint. It clears space for a forgotten epoch to emerge not as a claim, but as a possibility shaped by loss. The earth has spoken often. It has also been quiet for longer than we can measure. In that quiet, entire worlds may have risen and fallen without leaving a voice. Silence does not deny them. It simply refuses to confirm them, and in that refusal, the past remains open. A forgotten epoch does not announce itself with ruins or names. It reveals itself indirectly through absence shaped into form. In the geological record, there are intervals where time appears to hesitate, where familiar patterns loosen, and something unfamiliar briefly takes hold. These epochs are not missing because nothing happened. They are forgotten because what happened did not survive in a recognizable way. Deep time is filled with worlds that no longer resemble our own. Atmospheres richer in carbon dioxide, skies tinted by methane haze. Oceans warm and anoxic, continents arranged into shapes that would feel alien to modern eyes. In these worlds, life adapted to conditions that no longer exist. Complexity arose, stabilized, and then dissolved when the environment shifted again. Each epoch was complete in itself. None were rehearsals for us. The fossil record hints at these lost chapters unevenly. Sudden bursts of diversity appear without clear ancestors. Entire groups vanish with little warning. Between these events lie long plateaus where evolution seems to pause, as if life were waiting for permission to change again. These pauses are not emptiness, they are compression. Millions of years reduced to a thin band of stone. A forgotten epoch is defined not by what we know, but by what we can no longer ask. When rock layers are recycled, when sediments are eroded, when heat and pressure erase, detailed questions themselves are destroyed. We cannot investigate what no longer exists. The silence described earlier becomes structural here. It forms the boundaries of imagination. In these ancient worlds, intelligence may have taken forms we do not recognize. We equate intelligence with tools, language structures, external modification of environment. But intelligence is at its core a strategy for processing information and responding to complexity. Evolution experiments constantly. It is not obligated to repeat successful designs. Consider the Ediacaran period, a time before hard skeletons, before familiar body plans. Life spread across the seafloor in soft quilted forms, fractal and strange. Some organisms were meters wide yet left no durable remains. Their biology may have relied on processes now extinct. Whatever intelligence might have existed in such a world, if any, would leave almost nothing behind. Later, epochs offered different opportunities. Higher oxygen levels allowed larger bodies. Warmer climates reduced energetic costs. Long periods of stability allowed specialization. Insects grew enormous. Reptilian lineages experimented with social behavior. Mammal-like creatures developed differentiated teeth, complex brains, and extended parental care. These traits do not guarantee intelligence, but they make it plausible. A forgotten epoch does not require a global civilization. It requires only localized complexity that persisted long enough to matter, then vanished. Coastal societies would be the first to disappear as sea levels rose. Lowland ecosystems would drown or erode. What survived would retreat. Inland simplified, stripped of infrastructure and memory. In such a collapse, stone would outlast wood, but even stone would not endure indefinitely. Without maintenance, structures fracture. Without continuity, knowledge dissolves. A society does not need to be annihilated to be erased. It only needs to lose transmission. The forgotten epoch is therefore not a single time. It is a category. It includes any interval where complexity rose above the background noise of survival and then fell back into it without leaving a clear signature. These epochs are invisible not because they were insignificant, but because the planet is efficient at forgetting. Geology confirms this efficiency. Most sedimentary rock ever formed has been destroyed. Most land surfaces older than a few 100 million years no longer exist. Entire continents have been subducted. Oceans have opened and closed. Any evidence embedded in those lost surfaces is gone beyond recovery. This loss forces a shift in perspective. We are not searching for a missing city. We are searching for a missing context. The forgotten epoch would not announce itself as an advanced world. It would reveal itself only through indirect consequences, subtle distortions in cycles, anomalies that suggest something once altered the system. In climate records, there are moments where feedbacks behave oddly. Warming accelerates faster than expected. Cooling arrives abruptly. Carbon reservoirs empty or refill without obvious triggers. These events are usually explained individually. But they also mark transitions between epochs, moments when the planet reorganized itself. Reorganization implies prior organization. Before a system resets, it must have structure. Ecosystems do not collapse unless they are complex enough to collapse. A forgotten epoch may therefore be inferred not from what remains, but from the violence of what ended. Biology echoes this pattern. After mass extinctions, life takes millions of years to recover complexity. The new world does not resemble the old. Dominant groups disappear permanently. Ecological roles are refilled by different forms. This suggests that whatever was lost was deeply integrated, not easily replaced. In human terms, we understand this intuitively. When a culture collapses, rebuilding is not immediate. Skills are lost. Languages fragment. Knowledge decays. Over generations, only myths remain. Scale this process across millions of years and even myths dissolve. The forgotten epoch may therefore be less dramatic than imagined. No global empire, no uniform technology, just pockets of intelligence responding creatively to their environments, leaving marks too subtle or too fragile to survive planetary processes. Their end would not be marked by ruins, but by silence. Night encourages this way of thinking. Without light, the imagination relaxes its demand for clarity. You can sense how much could exist without being seen. The dark forest hides more than it reveals. The deep ocean conceals entire ecosystems unknown to surface life. Ice locks away landscapes we may never explore. The forgotten epoch belongs to these hidden spaces. It exists not as a claim, but as a plausible consequence of deep time operating without regard for memory. If Earth has produced intelligence, once it could do so again. If it could do so again, it could have done so before. This does not diminish our significance. It reframes it. We are not the culmination of a process, we are one expression within it. The forgotten epoch reminds us that history is not a ladder, but a field of overlapping experiments, most of which end without acknowledgement. What makes this unsettling is not the idea of predecessors, but the fragility it implies. If others rose and fell without trace, so can we. The planet does not archive achievement. It archives change. Only what alters cycles leaves a shadow. As this chapter settles, the forgotten epoch remains undefined. It does not demand belief. It asks only for allowance. Allowance for complexity beyond our timelines. Allowance for loss beyond our imagination. Allowance for humility in the face of a planet that has been forgetting far longer than we have been remembering. The past is not empty behind us. It is crowded with lives and systems that no longer have names. The forgotten epoch is not a place we can visit. It is a condition we must accept. And in accepting it, we prepare ourselves to understand the reset that inevitably follows. A reset is rarely sudden from the planet's perspective. What feels like an ending to those living within it is to the Earth a long exhale. Pressure that has been building quietly is released not with intention but with inevitability. Systems drift away from balance, then are pulled back by forces far larger than any single organism or culture. The reset is not destruction, it is regulation. Geology teaches this patiently. Continents collide and pile upward, growing unstable under their own height. Eventually gravity intervenes. Mountains erode. Materials carried away by rivers redistributed into basins pressed into new stone. The surface flattens. Energy is dissipated. This is not failure, it is completion. Climate follows the same logic. Greenhouse gases accumulate, temperatures rise, feedback loops accelerate change, ice melts, sea levels climb, coastlines retreat. When thresholds are crossed, the system responds forcefully, shifting circulation patterns, altering chemistry, triggering cascades that feel abrupt only because they were prepared for over millennia. From within a civilization, such moments appear catastrophic. Floods swallow settlements, droughts starve populations, ecosystems collapse faster than adaptation can follow. But the planet does not recognize catastrophe. It recognizes imbalance. The reset is simply the moment when correction becomes unavoidable. The history of life is marked by these breaths. Mass extinctions punctuate deep time like punctuation marks. Each one erases complexity not selectively but comprehensively. Dominant species vanish alongside obscure ones. Ecological networks unravel. The survivors are not the strongest but the most adaptable, the least specialized, the most capable of enduring scarcity. After the reset, recovery is slow. The planet does not rush to replace what was lost. It allows new systems to assemble, gradually experimenting with forms and relationships. Millions of years may pass before complexity approaches previous levels. The new world is never a replica of the old. Reset is not rewind, it is revision. This pattern matters because it reveals how fragile continuity truly is. Intelligence, if it arises, does so within these unstable conditions. It does not sit above them. It is embedded within climate chemistry and ecology. When those foundations shift too quickly, intelligence becomes vulnerable regardless of its sophistication. A technological civilization might imagine itself buffered against nature. Infrastructure, knowledge, and coordination create the illusion of control, yet these systems depend on stability. Supply chains assume predictable seasons. Energy grids assume intact networks. Communication assumes functioning memory. When environmental baselines shift, these assumptions fail rapidly. The reset does not need to target intelligence directly. It only needs to disrupt the conditions intelligence relies upon. Crop failure leads to famine. Famine leads to migration. Migration leads to conflict. Conflict accelerates collapse. Within a few generations, complexity can unravel beyond recovery. Geological resets leave signatures that appear deceptively natural. Volcanism intensifies. Oceans lose oxygen. Carbon cycles destabilize. These processes are often cited as causes, but they may also be consequences. Feedback loops do not distinguish between trigger and response. Once activated, they amplify whatever initiated them. In this way, a reset can erase its own origin. The final record shows fire, flood, and ice, but not the sequence that led there. If a civilization contributed to instability, its role would vanish with it. The planet would preserve the outcome, not the cause. This erasure is efficient. Cities dissolve into sediment. Metals corrode and disperse. Knowledge stored in fragile media decays. Within thousands of years, the physical trace of complex systems becomes ambiguous. Within millions, it becomes indistinguishable from background noise. The Younger Dryas offers a glimpse of a reset in progress. A sudden return to near-glacial conditions interrupted warming at the end of the last ice age. Ecosystems shifted rapidly. Human cultures adapted or vanished. Sea levels rose dramatically afterward, drowning coastlines where early societies likely clustered. Much of what existed there is now inaccessible beneath water. The archaeological record following this period shows abrupt change. Old technologies disappear. New ones appear. Monumental structures emerge unexpectedly, as if memory survived even when continuity did not. This suggests not creation from nothing but reorganization after loss. Reset does not imply total erasure. Fragments persist. Skills survive in diminished form. Stories compress into myth. Knowledge becomes symbolic rather than technical. Over time, fragments recombine into new systems unaware of their ancestry. The Earth favours this mode of renewal. It does not preserve progress. It preserves adaptability. Each reset clears the board just enough to allow new configurations to arise without being constrained by old ones. From the planet's perspective, this is efficient. From the perspective of those living through it, it is devastating. This tension between scale and experience is central. Intelligence experiences time emotionally. The Earth experiences it mechanically. What feels like an ending is to geology a transition state. What feels unprecedented has often happened before under different conditions. Night reinforces this understanding. Darkness removes the illusion of permanence. It reminds the mind how dependent it is on light, warmth, and stability. Without these, perception narrows. Survival becomes immediate. Long-term planning dissolves. This is the mental state resets in force. In such moments, intelligence simplifies. It focuses on essentials. Abstraction gives way to instinct. Complex systems collapse into local solutions. Over generations, memory fades. The previous world becomes legend. The reset succeeds not by destroying everything, but by preventing reconstruction. The planet does not mourn what is lost. It does not celebrate what returns. It continues its cycles indifferent to narrative. Reset is not punishment. It is balance reasserting itself after drift. This realization reframes fear. The question is not whether resets will occur, they are inevitable. The question is whether intelligence can recognize the pattern while still embedded within it, whether awareness can extend beyond immediate survival to long-term restraint. If previous intelligences existed, their disappearance would not require malice or error. It would require only participation in a system that does not privilege memory. The reset would arrive, as it always does, carried by forces too large to negotiate with. As this chapter settles, the reset becomes less an event and more a rhythm. Expansion followed by contraction. Complexity followed by simplicity. Inhale, exhale. The earth breathes deeply and everything upon it must adjust or be carried away. Understanding this does not demand despair. It invites humility. It suggests that survival is not guaranteed by intelligence alone, but by alignment with the planet's cycles. To recognize the reset is not to surrender. It is to listen. And in that listening, the next echo begins to form. An echo is not a repetition. It is a deformation. Sound leaves its source and returns altered by distance, surface, and delay. What comes back is familiar enough to recognize, but changed enough to unsettle. In deep time, the past behaves the same way. It does not return intact. It arrives warped by erosion, filtered through survival, compressed into habits that feel instinctive rather than inherited. The earth carries echoes in places we rarely think to listen, in the shape of valleys that guide rivers along paths chosen millions of years ago, in fault lines that remember ancient collisions and still twitch under modern cities. Gravity is memory. It pulls matter toward configurations it has favored before. What has happened once becomes easier to happen again. Biology preserves echoes with ruthless efficiency. Genes do not record stories. They record solutions. When an environment rewards a behavior, that behavior becomes encoded, passed forward long after the original context disappears. Fear responses, social bonding, pattern recognition, all survive resets because they are useful under many conditions. The past hums quietly in every nervous system. Some echoes feel architectural. Across the world, humans stack stone in similar ways, favouring massive blocks, tight joints, and orientations aligned with sky and horizon. These choices are often explained pragmatically as convergent solutions to gravity and material limits. That explanation is true. It is also incomplete. Preference itself can be inherited. When a technique works, it lingers. Even after its origin is forgotten, its shape remains attractive. A method feels right without anyone remembering why. The echo is not knowledge. It is intuition hardened into tradition. Over time, intuition becomes ritual. Ritual becomes architecture. Architecture becomes mystery. Language carries echoes as rhythm rather than meaning. Certain sounds recur across unrelated cultures. Cadences repeat. Myths mirror one another not in detail but in structure. A golden age, a fall, survivors who carry fragments of wisdom into a diminished world. Fire flood, icy ski. These are not coincidences, they are compressions. Myth is memory under pressure. When history cannot be preserved accurately, it is preserved emotionally. Facts blur. Timelines collapse. What remains is significance. A warning encoded as story, an echo shaped to survive forgetting. The echo also lives in behaviour. Humans repeatedly settle near water despite its danger. Coastlines attract us even as they erase us. We rebuild in floodplains. We return to fault zones. This is often framed as ignorance or necessity. But it is also habit. The memory of abundance outweighs the memory of loss. Agriculture itself may be an echo. The impulse to domesticate, to control growth cycles, to synchronize human labor with planetary rhythms feels inevitable to us. But inevitability may be inheritance. A remembered solution resurfacing under familiar pressures. When conditions resemble the past, responses follow the same grooves. In genetics, there are sequences whose purpose remains unclear. Conserved elements that persist across species maintained despite not coding for obvious functions. They are echoes at the molecular level. Instructions whose original context is gone yet whose presence still matters enough to retain. Silence does not erase them. The Earth echoes too. Chemical cycles oscillate around familiar states. Carbon moves between atmosphere, ocean and stone along paths worn smooth by repetition. When disrupted, it seeks equilibrium through familiar routes. The system remembers how to stabilize itself, even if stabilization is destructive to those caught within it. These echoes do not prove prior intelligence. They demonstrate recurrence. Patterns that reappear because the constraints that shaped them persist. Physics does not reinvent itself. Chemistry does not forget. Given similar conditions, similar outcomes emerge. The echo is the sound of constraint repeating itself. What unsettles us is not the existence of echoes, but the possibility that we are responding to them unconsciously. That our choices feel free while being gently guided by grooves carved long before we arrived. That what we call innovation may be variation within a narrow corridor of possibilities. Night makes these thoughts soft, less accusatory. In darkness, it is easier to accept influence without assigning blame. The echo does not diminish agency, it contextualizes it. We act within a field shaped by previous actions, many of which we did not choose. Some echoes feel almost physical. Standing among ancient stone, one can sense proportion before understanding function. Weight feels meaningful, orientation feels intentional. Even when explanations are offered, something resists closure. The structure feels older than its story. That feeling is not evidence, it is resonance. Resonance matters because it guides attention. It tells us where to look longer, where to listen more carefully. The echo draws curiosity without promising answers. It suggests continuity without asserting lineage. It is the past tapping lightly on the present, asking to be noticed, not decoded. Technology carries echoes as well. Networks mimic neural patterns. Cities mirror ant colonies. Resource extraction follows veins like biological circulatory systems. We build systems that resemble life because life is what has worked. The echo here is functional, not mystical. When systems fail, they often fail in familiar ways. Overextension, resource depletion, feedback loops ignored until thresholds are crossed. Collapse patterns repeat because they are tied to constraints, not culture. The echo warns without speaking. This warning is rarely dramatic. It is subtle, arriving as discomfort rather than fear. A sense that something is familiar when it should not be. That the path ahead has been walked before, though no one remembers by whom. The echo is strongest at moments of transition when the present begins to resemble a past configuration closely enough to activate dormant responses. If earlier intelligence existed, their most durable legacy would not be objects or structures. It would be grooves in behavior biases towards certain solutions, aversions shaped by forgotten catastrophes. These would survive resets because they are adaptive. They would feel like common sense. Common sense is the quietest echo of all. It is rarely questioned because it feels self-evident. Yet what feels self-evident is often inherited from conditions no longer present. The echo persists even when its origin is gone. The Earth itself behaves this way. It returns to familiar climate states after disruption. Ice ages recur, warm periods re-emerge, the system oscillates within bounds set by solar input, orbital mechanics and chemistry. The echo here is planetary and different to life, yet shaping it relentlessly. Understanding the echo does not require belief in predecessors. It requires recognition that systems remember through repetition, that history leaves grooves even when details vanish, that silence does not erase influence. As this chapter settles, the echo remains gentle. It does not demand interpretation. It invites awareness of pattern, awareness of recurrence, awareness that the present is never entirely new. The past does not need to return fully to shape us. It only needs to hum faintly beneath our choices, and in that hum, history continues to speak without words, guiding us toward patterns we have followed before, whether we recognize them or not. A pattern is not repetition for its own sake. It is recurrence shaped by constraint. When conditions align in similar ways, outcomes converge even across immense spans of time. The Earth is a system bound by physics, chemistry, and energy flow, and systems prefer familiar solutions. What we call history is often the visible trace of these preferences expressing themselves again and again. At first glance, history appears linear. One era replaces another. Tools improve. Knowledge accumulates. This view is comforting because it suggests direction and purpose. Yet geology offers a different lesson. Layers stack, but they also fold. Older rock rises above younger. What came before can reappear on the surface long after it was buried. Time does not simply move forward. It loops, overlaps, and resurfaces. Climate patterns make this unmistakable. Ice ages return with regular irregularity, guided by orbital mechanics and feedback loops rather than by chance. Warm periods follow cold ones, then retreat again. The details differ, but the structure persists. Expansion, contraction, stabilization, disruption, recovery. These phases repeat not because the planet lacks imagination, but because the range of stable states is limited. Life mirrors this behavior. Ecosystems organize around energy gradients. Producers capture sunlight. Consumers distribute it. Decomposers recycle what remains. When disruption occurs, the same roles re-emerge, filled by different organisms. Form changes. Function persists. The pattern survives even when participants do not. Intelligence, if it arises within such systems, would not escape this logic. It would organize around similar pressures. Resource acquisition, social coordination, environmental modification. These are not cultural accidents. They are responses to constraint. Given similar challenges, intelligence will tend to produce similar solutions. This is why certain developments appear repeatedly. Stoneworking emerges independently in multiple lineages. Agriculture arises wherever climate stabilizes long enough to reward investment. Urbanization follows surplus. Hierarchy follows scale. None of this requires shared ancestry. It requires shared conditions. The pattern becomes clearer when collapse enters the picture. Complex systems fail in recognizable ways. Overextension strains resources. Feedback loops amplify stress. Adaptation lags behind change. The system becomes brittle. A shock arrives and the structure fractures. This sequence is visible in ecological collapse, in economic failure, in biological extinction. It is not moral. It is mechanical. What makes the pattern unsettling is not its existence, but our tendency to deny it. We prefer to believe our moment is unique, that our tools insulate us from recurrence, that progress has finally broken the cycle. Yet every system that believes it has escaped constraint eventually encounters a limit it did not anticipate. Geology teaches patience here. Mountains rise, then erode. Continents assemble, then fragment. Oceans open, then close. Nothing persists indefinitely. Stability is temporarily maintained only as long as energy flows align. When alignment shifts, the system reorganizes. In this light, civilization is not an endpoint. It is a phase, a configuration of matter and behavior sustained by specific conditions. When those conditions change, the configuration dissolves. Another may form later under different circumstances. The pattern does not care whether the participants remember what came before. Memory is the fragile part. Patterns persist because they are enforced by constraint. Memory fails because it depends on continuity. Writing decays. Oral tradition distorts. Institutions collapse. The pattern survives without memory. It reasserts itself when conditions allow. This distinction matters deeply. It means that the recurrence of certain structures does not require inheritance of knowledge. It requires only the reappearance of pressure. When pressure returns, the same grooves guide response. Architecture offers a quiet example. Massive stone structures appear in disparate cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The explanation is often practical. Stone endures. Large blocks resist earthquakes. Weight provides stability. These reasons are valid, but they also reveal pattern. Gravity favors mass. Humans respond accordingly. The same applies to orientation. Alignments with solstices, equinoxes, and cardinal directions recur globally. The sky offers a stable reference frame. It outlasts politics and language. Any culture seeking order will eventually look upward. The pattern emerges not from shared myth, but from shared dependence on cycles. Even myth itself follows pattern. Flood stories appear worldwide, not because one story spread everywhere, but because flooding is a universal consequence of climate instability. Fire from the sky appears in many traditions, not because of shared fantasy, but because impacts and eruptions have occurred repeatedly. Myth compresses pattern into narrative. The danger arises when pattern is mistaken for destiny. Cycles describe tendencies, not inevitabilities. The earth resets, but the timing and severity vary. Intelligence responds, but its choices still matter. Awareness of pattern does not remove agency. It clarifies the stakes. Night encourages this clarity. In darkness, the illusion of endless progress fades. The mind becomes more receptive to rhythm than to trajectory. You can feel the repetition in your own breathing. Inhale, exhale, expansion, contraction. Life itself is cyclical. Why would civilization be exempt? The pattern does not predict a specific outcome. It outlines a range, growth within limits, stress beyond them, adjustment through loss, renewal in altered form. Where we fall within that range depends on choices made under pressure. If earlier intelligences existed, they would have faced the same pattern. Their rise would coincide with stability, their fall with disruption. Their traces would fade as the system reorganized. We would not see their cities. We would see only the recurring shape of rise and collapse written into the planet's behavior. This realization reframes ambition. The goal is no longer to escape the pattern, but to understand it well enough to navigate it gently, to reduce overshoot, to respect thresholds, to align complexity with resilience rather than extraction. Patterns are patient teachers. They do not punish ignorance immediately. They allow deviation for a time, but eventually they assert themselves. When they do, resistance increases damage. Acceptance reduces it. The Earth does not ask us to stop building or thinking or exploring. It asks us to remember scale, to recognize that systems larger than us operate on timescales longer than our attention. That ignoring these scales does not make them irrelevant. As this chapter settles, the pattern reveals itself not as a trap but as a context, a set of boundaries within which creativity can flourish without collapse. History becomes less a march and more a tide, advancing, retreating, shaping the shore without ever settling permanently. We are not the first to stand at this shoreline. We will not be the last. The pattern has been here longer than memory and will remain after memory fades. To see it clearly is not to surrender hope, but to ground it. The path forward is not a straight line drawn into the future. It is a careful movement within a field of forces that have shaped worlds before us. Understanding the pattern does not tell us what will happen. It tells us what has always been possible. And in that understanding, the next question begins to form not about the past alone, but about the warnings embedded within the pattern itself. Warnings rarely arrive as commands. They emerge as signals that grow louder only when ignored. In deep time, the Earth does not announce change with a single sign, but with a convergence of subtle shifts, each small enough to dismiss on its own. Temperatures drift, seasons stretch, currents slow, chemistry tilts. Together these signals form a language the planet has spoken repeatedly long before any listener learned how to hear it. The warning is not sudden, it is cumulative. In geology, warnings appear first as imbalance. Carbon accumulates faster than it is removed. Ice retreats beyond its historical bounds. Oceans warm unevenly, disrupting circulation that once distributed heat reliably. These changes are not anomalies by themselves. They become warnings only when they align, when multiple systems begin to move in the same destabilizing direction. The Earth signals stress not through catastrophe, but through loss of resilience. Biology responds quickly to these signals. Species migrate before climates fully change. Flowering times shift. Food webs strain as timing falls out of sync. Extinction begins quietly long before it becomes visible in the fossil record. By the time collapse is obvious, the warning phase has already passed. The system has committed to adjustment. Recovery, if it comes, will take far longer than the disruption that triggered it. Human societies experience warnings differently. They interpret change through culture, economy, and belief. A drought becomes a political problem. A flood becomes a logistical challenge. A heat wave becomes a temporary inconvenience. The warning is fragmented into manageable pieces, each addressed locally, each stripped of its connection to the larger pattern. This fragmentation dulls urgency. It allows systems to persist beyond safe limits. History shows that civilizations rarely collapse without warning. There are always signs: soil degradation, resource depletion, increasing inequality, infrastructure strained beyond maintenance, conflict rising at the edges. These signals are well documented. What is less documented is how often they are recognized and still ignored. The warning is not hidden. It is reinterpreted until it loses its meaning. This reinterpretation is not stupidity. It is adaptation. Systems evolve to maintain stability, not to disrupt themselves. A society built on growth will frame every challenge as an obstacle to be overcome by more growth. A system organized around extraction will respond to scarcity by extracting faster. The warning is absorbed into the logic that created it. The Earth does not negotiate with this logic. Feedback loops accelerate once thresholds are crossed. Ice loss reduces reflectivity, increasing warming. Warming releases greenhouse gases, increasing warming further. Forest dieback reduces carbon uptake, amplifying imbalance. These processes do not wait for consensus. They respond only to physics. Deep time reveals that warnings are often ignored until they become unavoidable. Before major extinctions, ecosystems show stress markers: reduced diversity, increased disease, simplification of food webs. These are signs of fragility. When disruption arrives, the system lacks buffers. Collapse is rapid, not because the trigger is large, but because resilience is gone. If earlier intelligences existed, they would have faced the same dynamic. Their warnings would not have been alien. They would have looked familiar. Climate instability, resource limits, environmental feedbacks. The language of the planet does not change. Only the listeners do. The most unsettling aspect of warnings is their ambiguity. They do not specify outcome. A warming trend does not say how hot it will get. A rising sea does not announce how far it will rise. This uncertainty invites delay. Action is postponed until certainty increases. But certainty arrives only after commitment is no longer optional. Myths preserve this dynamic symbolically. Stories of prophets ignored, of signs misread, of civilizations warned by floods, fires, or celestial omens they failed to heed. These are not predictions. They are compressions of experience. They encode the emotional truth that warnings are often recognized only in hindsight. Night makes warnings feel distant. The immediate world is quiet, the body is safe, urgency fades. This is both a mercy and a risk. It allows rest. It also allows denial. Warnings do not interrupt sleep. They wait. In modern terms, warnings are mediated by data. Graphs rise, projections extend forward, models outline possible futures. Each layer of abstraction increases distance from lived experience. The warning becomes intellectual rather than visceral. It is easier to debate than to feel. The Earth's warnings are not moral judgments. They are informational signals. They indicate that a system is approaching a boundary. Boundaries are not punishments. They are limits. Ignoring them does not provoke retaliation. It provokes correction. Correction is indifferent to intent. A system does not care whether imbalance was created accidentally or deliberately. It responds only to magnitude. When response begins, it cannot be negotiated away. The warning phase is the only time when outcomes remain flexible. Deep time shows that some warnings were heeded. After collapses, new systems sometimes emerged more resilient, better aligned with constraints. Others repeated the same mistakes under different conditions. The pattern does not guarantee learning. It only offers opportunity. The tragedy is not that warnings exist. It is that they are so often reframed as inconveniences rather than messages. A warning asks for humility. It asks a system to slow down, to reassess assumptions, to value resilience over expansion. These requests are rarely popular. If earlier intelligences left echoes rather than artifacts, their warnings would be embedded in pattern rather than instruction, in cycles that repeat, in collapses that mirror one another, in myths that refuse to disappear. The warning would not say what to do, it would show what happens when nothing changes. As this chapter settles, the warning remains unresolved. It does not demand action within this story. It asks for recognition. Recognition that the planet communicates continuously, that ignoring those communications does not silence them, that deep time is patient but not forgiving. The warning is not about apocalypse. It is about adjustment, about whether intelligence can respond to signals before thresholds are crossed, whether awareness can translate into restraint, whether memory can interrupt pattern. The Earth will continue regardless. It always has. The question the warning raises is quieter and more intimate. It asks whether those living within the system can learn to listen before the language shifts from signal to force. Look upward long enough, and the ground begins to feel less solid beneath you. The night sky does not sit above the Earth like a ceiling. It presses downward, heavy with distance, ancient with repetition. Stars do not flicker out of fragility, but out of memory, their light bent by atmosphere, delayed by space arriving long after its source has changed or vanished. When you lie still beneath them, the boundary between sky and stone begins to soften, and you sense that Earth is not isolated, but held within a larger rhythm that does not belong to it alone. Geology teaches that the planet is not a closed system. Elements that shape continents were forged inside stars long before Earth existed. Iron in your blood and calcium in your bones were born in stellar collapse, scattered through space, gathered by gravity and folded into rock water and life. Gravity is memory on a cosmic scale, pulling fragments of exploded suns back into form. The ground beneath you is not separate from the sky above you. It is the sky slowed and cooled into stone. When ancient cultures looked upward, they did not see abstraction. They saw instruction. The sky was a clock, a map, a mirror. Seasonal migrations, planting cycles, and ritual calendars followed the slow breathing of the heavens. This was not superstition. It was observation extended across generations. The stars returned when expected. Eclipses followed patterns. Comets arrived as visitors rare and disruptive. To early minds, sky and earth were a single conversation, one speaking in motion, the other answering in change. Modern science reframed that conversation into separate disciplines. Astronomy looked outward. Geology looked downward. The separation brought clarity but also amnesia. We forgot that impacts from space have rewritten Earth's surface repeatedly. We forgot that orbital shifts alter climate. We forgot that solar activity changes atmospheric chemistry. The sky does not merely illuminate Earth, it interferes with it. Over deep time, that interference becomes destiny. Meteor impacts are not rare when measured in millions of years. They are punctuation marks in Earth's story, sudden interruptions that reset ecosystems and erase complexity. Asteroids deliver destruction, but also water carbon and rare metals. They collapse forests and seed oceans in the same motion. From a geological perspective, impact is not an anomaly. It is part of the system. The sky shapes the Earth as surely as erosion and plate movement. Consider the thin layer of iridium found at the boundary where dinosaurs vanished. That metal rare on Earth but common in space, settle like dust after catastrophe. It is a fingerprint left by the sky. Below it lies a world that ended. Above it, a world that struggled to begin again. No monument marks the transition. Only chemistry remembers. Stone holds the memory quietly, waiting for those who know how to read it. Orbital mechanics work more slowly, but just as relentlessly. The tilt of Earth's axis shifts. Its orbit stretches and relaxes. These changes, known as Milankovitch cycles, regulate ice ages, sea levels, and deserts. Civilizations rise along stable coastlines and fall when those coastlines drown. Forests advance and retreat in rhythm with the sky's geometry. What feels like human history is often climate history, and climate history is written by celestial motion. This relationship suggests something unsettling. If intelligence arose before us, it would not have developed in isolation from the sky. It would have lived under the same stars, endured the same cycles, faced the same bombardments. Its successes and failures would be entangled with astronomical events it could not control. Collapse would not require moral failure or technological arrogance alone. Sometimes the sky simply breathes differently and the Earth must respond. Ancient structures across the world reflect this awareness. Stone circles, pyramids, and temples align with solstices, equinoxes, and star risings that no longer occur due to precession. Their builders understood time not as years, but as cycles spanning centuries. They built not only to last, but to remember positions that would one day drift. This implies inheritance. Knowledge passed forward perhaps long after its origin was forgotten. The sky changes slowly enough that memory can persist, but not indefinitely. After thousands of years, alignments lose meaning. After tens of thousands, the stars themselves appear unfamiliar. Knowledge that once felt eternal becomes myth. What remains is ritual without context, architecture without explanation. If earlier intelligences mapped the sky, their records may survive only as stones pointing toward nothing we recognize. Deep beneath the ocean floor, magnetic reversals are recorded in basalt, like a barcode of planetary history. These reversals correlate with changes in solar radiation and cosmic ray exposure. When Earth's magnetic field weakens, the sky touches the ground more directly. Radiation increases, atmospheres thin, life adapts or retreats. This invisible shield generated by Earth's molten core is another quiet mediator between sky and stone. Civilizations rarely consider magnetic fields or solar storms when telling their own stories. Yet a sufficiently powerful solar event could disable modern infrastructure instantly. Satellites would fail, power grids would collapse, memory stored digitally would vanish without fire or flood. The sky would not attack, it would simply behave as it always has. Fragility is revealed not by hostility but by indifference. The farther back you go, the more entangled sky and Earth become. In the early solar system, impacts were constant. The surface was molten, unstable, rewritten repeatedly. Any early complexity would have struggled to persist. But later, epochs offered longer windows of stability. Millions of years without major impact. Calm skies, predictable cycles, time enough for intelligence to emerge, experiment, and perhaps disappear before conditions shifted again. This reframes the question of evidence. We expect ruins. The planet expects erasure. We search for permanence in a system designed for renewal. Sky-driven resets leave little behind except chemical signatures and fractured layers. From orbit, Earth looks serene. From stone, it looks restless. Memory must adapt to survive such a world, becoming lighter, quieter, easier to bury. The night sky invites humility because it operates without reference to us. Stars collapse regardless of witness. Orbits precess without intention. Impacts arrive without warning. The Earth does not negotiate with the cosmos. It absorbs, adapts, and moves on. If intelligence arose before us, it learned this lesson or it vanished beneath it. The sky is not cruel. It is simply vast. When you lie beneath the stars, your body responds to ancient cues. Circadian rhythms align with darkness. Thoughts slow. Breathing deepens. This is not cultural. It is biological. Life evolved under a sky that demanded rest as much as activity. Silence at night is not emptiness, it is synchronization. The planet and the body briefly agree on tempo. In that agreement, imagination loosens. You can feel how small events fit inside large emotions, how personal history dissolves into planetary history, which dissolves into stellar history. The mind stops insisting on uniqueness and begins to sense participation. You're not separate from this system. You're one expression of it, temporary and attentive. If others came before, they too would have looked upward with the same mixture of awe and calculation. They would have traced patterns, predicted returns, and feared disruptions. They may have built to mark moments they knew would not last. Their failure, if it came, would not have been announced. It would have arrived as altered seasons, dimmer skies, rising seas, or fire falling silently from above. Stone does not judge these outcomes. It records them. Sky does not remember them. It continues. Between the two, Earth keeps breathing, layering memory beneath memory, compressing meaning into rock. What survives is never the whole story. It is the outline left when everything else is gone. As you listen now, the sky outside is likely unchanged, yet it is never the same sky twice. Stars move, radiation fluctuates, the Earth rotates beneath your feet at a speed you cannot feel. You are already drifting through space while lying still. This is the quiet truth hidden in plain sight. To understand lost civilizations, you must understand this partnership. Earth holds memory. Sky enforces change. Intelligence arises where stability lasts long enough and disappears when it does not. This is not tragedy. It is pattern. And patterns do not ask permission. Let the thoughts settle gently. The stars above you are ancient. The stone beneath you is older than memory. Between them, life flickers, learns, and fades. That is not insignificance. It is belonging. There is a moment late at night when the world feels strangely familiar, even though nothing new has happened. The room is the same, the air unchanged, yet a quiet recognition settles in the body as if something old has come back into alignment. This is not memory in the ordinary sense. It is deeper, slower, closer to instinct. The return does not announce itself. It arrives the way tides do unnoticed until you realize the shoreline has shifted. Geology knows this feeling well. Continents do not repeat their shapes, yet they gather again and again, colliding, breaking apart, drifting only to meet once more in altered form. The supercontinents of the past did not vanish forever. They returned as echoes reassembled with different edges, carrying the same rocks into new configurations. The planet does not move forward in a straight line. It circles its own habits. Civilizations mirror this behavior. They rise with confidence, convinced they are unprecedented, convinced that what they are doing has never been done before. They name themselves modern, advanced, final. Yet the patterns they follow are older than language. Centralization, expansion, resource extraction, complexity layered upon complexity until the system becomes brittle. Collapse is not an interruption, it is the return of balance. The unsettling thought is not that we might fall, it is that we may have been here before. Not as the same people, not with the same faces or names, but as a familiar arrangement of ambition and intelligence testing the limits of a finite world. When intelligence returns, it does not start from nothing. It inherits conditions shaped by previous cycles, even if it does not remember them. In deep time, return does not mean repetition of detail. It means repetition of structure. The same pressures generate similar responses. The same constraints bend thought in the same directions. When resources concentrate, power concentrates. When power concentrates, fragility increases. These are not moral failures. They are physical dynamics expressed through living systems. You can see this in the fossil record. After mass extinctions, life does not invent entirely new solutions. It revisits old ones. Body plans reappear. Ecological roles refill. Predators return to familiar shapes. Intelligence, if it emerges, would do the same. It would solve problems with available materials guided by physics rather than imagination. Stone metal energy symbols. The toolkit is limited by the planet. This suggests that earlier intelligences, if they existed, may not feel alien at all. Their cities, if they had them, might have resembled ours in function even if not in form. their mistakes would feel uncomfortably recognizable. Overreach, miscalculation, delayed response to warning. The return is not about mystery, it is about recognition. The Earth encourages this forgetting. By erasing detail, it allows each cycle to believe itself unique. Memory becomes shallow enough that confidence can grow again. This is not deception, it is ecology. If every generation remembered every collapse, paralysis would follow. Life requires amnesia to continue experimenting, yet some memory leaks through. Myths repeat themes across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. Floods, fires, falling skies, lost golden ages, teachers who warn and vanish. These are not records. They are emotional fossils. Feelings compressed into story, carried forward when facts dissolve. The return often announces itself first through these resonances. Modern science experiences its own version of return. Ideas dismissed decades ago quietly resurface with new language and data. Cycles in climate once considered impossible are rediscovered in ice cores. Catastrophic events once denied become accepted mechanisms. What was unthinkable becomes inevitable, once evidence accumulates slowly enough to feel safe. The return is also visible in technology. Tools reinvented in digital form echo older functions. Networks resemble ancient trade routes. Algorithms mimic social hierarchies. Even artificial intelligence reflects the same desire to externalize memory and labor. We are not escaping history. We are reenacting it with different materials. This does not mean we are doomed to repeat collapse exactly. Cycles are not prisons. They are tendencies. Awareness introduces flexibility. But awareness must be accepted, not merely known. The most dangerous phase of any civilization is the moment it realizes others may have come before and assumes that knowledge alone will protect it. Protection requires humility. It requires recognizing that intelligence is not mastery over nature, but negotiation with it. The return becomes destructive when it is mistaken for destiny rather than pattern. If we believe collapse belongs only to the past, we invite it into the future. From a geological perspective, the present moment is brief and loud. Industrial civilization occupies a layer so thin it will be difficult to detect in deep time. A spike in carbon, a scattering of plastics, a faint radioactive signal. That is how the return will appear to whatever comes next. Not as monuments, but as a boundary. The question is whether that boundary marks transformation or erasure. Earlier cycles may have ended without successors capable of remembering them. The return would then be incomplete, starting again without inherited wisdom. Our advantage, fragile and uncertain, is that we can imagine predecessors. We can entertain the possibility that we are not first. This imagination is itself a form of memory. It does not prove anything, but it widens perspective. It slows arrogance. It introduces patience. When you believe you're alone in history, urgency dominates. When you suspect you are part of a sequence, responsibility deepens. The return also operates internally. Individuals reenact collective patterns in smaller form. Growth, complexity, exhaustion, rest. Sleep itself is a return. Consciousness withdraws, resets, and emerges altered but continuous. The body knows how to cycle even when the mind resists. This is why these questions feel heavy but calming. They align thought with natural rhythm. As you listen, you may feel a subtle easing, not because the ideas are comforting, but because they are familiar. Something in you recognizes the shape of the argument, not as belief but as pattern. This is how deep time speaks not through evidence alone, but through resonance. If intelligence has returned before it will return again regardless of outcome. The planet does not require success, it requires continuity. Life experiments endlessly because it can afford failure. The fear belongs only to those inside the experiment, not to the system that hosts it. This realization can feel cold, but it is also liberating. You are not responsible for saving the world alone. You are responsible for participating honestly while you are here. The return does not demand heroism, it invites alignment. Imagine earlier minds standing under unfamiliar stars, sensing change they could not stop. They may have argued, denied, delayed. They may also have built, warned, recorded in ways we barely recognize. Their success or failure does not define ours. But their existence, if it occurred, dissolves the illusion that this moment is final. The return softens the edge of fear. Collapse becomes transformation. Endings become thresholds. This does not minimize loss. It contextualizes it. Grief is real, but it is not the end of meaning. Meaning migrates like continents, like species, like ideas. As the cycle turns, the earth prepares without concern. Systems adjust, new balances emerge. What matters is not permanence but continuity of process. Intelligence that learns this may still fade, but it fades differently. With less panic, with more grace. The night outside remains quiet. Nothing dramatic is happening. That's the point. Returns are slow. They give warning through subtle repetition, through patterns that feel old because they are. If you sense familiarity now, it is not because you have lived this before as an individual. It is because life has. Rest in that thought. The return is not behind you or ahead of you. It is beneath you, moving at geological speed, patient, inevitable, and unconcerned with names. You are part of it, briefly aware, briefly listening before the rhythm carries on. At the end of long inquiry, there's rarely an answer that arrives cleanly. What comes instead is a settling, a quiet rearrangement of weight inside the mind, like dust finally choosing where to rest. Reflection is not the act of solving the question. It is the act of learning how to live with it. Deep time does not resolve itself into certainty. It invites acceptance. When you look back across everything traced so far, the evidence, the gaps, the patterns, the warnings, the cycles, one truth remains calm and unarguable. The earth is older than any story we tell about it. Whatever intelligence has appeared here, whether once or many times, has always been temporary. This is not an insult to intelligence. It is its context. Meaning does not come from permanence. It comes from participation. Geology teaches patience because it has no alternative. Layers form without intention. They accept pressure, heat, and silence without resistance. Memory is not preserved because it is important, but because conditions allow it. Reflection begins when the mind stops demanding importance and starts observing condition. Why do some things remain? Why do others vanish completely? The answers are physical, not moral. This reframes the question that began the journey. Whether we are the first intelligent species becomes less urgent than how intelligence behaves when it appears. Does it listen? Does it notice limits? Does it mistake momentum for destiny? These questions matter regardless of sequence. Even if we are the first, the lesson is unchanged. The planet does not adjust to belief, it adjusts to action. There is a quiet relief in this realization. It removes the burden of exceptionalism. You do not have to be the first to matter. You do not have to be the last to be meaningful. You exist within a continuum that neither elevates nor diminishes you. It simply includes you. Reflection softens ambition into attention. Night is the proper setting for this understanding. In darkness, the world narrows to essentials: breath, weight, temperature. The mind releases its grip on control and allows patterns to exist without resolution. This is not ignorance, it is alignment. Sleep itself is an agreement with uncertainty. You trust the body to continue without supervision. If earlier intelligence existed, they too would have faced this moment. A point where knowledge exceeded control, where awareness outpaced ability, where reflection became the only stable response. Perhaps some chose domination. Perhaps others chose withdrawal. Perhaps none chose correctly by modern standards. But correctness dissolves in deep time. Only consequence remains. The reflection offered here is not a warning or a promise. It is an orientation. A way of standing within uncertainty without collapsing into fear or arrogance. To know that evidence can vanish does not mean truth disappears. It means truth changes form. Stone remembers differently than language. Chemistry remembers differently than architecture. Patterns remember differently than facts. As you rest with this, the question becomes quieter. Are we the first? Are we the next? The urgency fades because the answer does not change the responsibility. Intelligence, whenever it appears, inherits the same task. To exist briefly without pretending it is forever. To act without assuming immunity. To remember without demanding permanence. Reflection does not demand belief. It asks only for attention. Attention to rhythm. to repetition, to the way systems behave when stretched too far, to the way silence often contains more information than noise. In this space, curiosity replaces certainty. Curiosity is gentler. It does not rush. The earth continues beneath you, indifferent yet generous, offering stability for as long as conditions allow. The sky continues above you, vast and uninterested in outcome. Between them, life persists, experiments and fades. This is not tragedy. It is process. Once understood, the process no longer threatens identity. It contextualizes it. Let the question remain unanswered. Unanswered questions are not failures. They are openings. They keep the mind from closing too tightly around a single story. They allow humility to breathe. Reflection is not the end of the journey. It is the place where the journey dissolves into awareness. As sleep approaches, the need to know recedes. The body accepts its place in the cycle without explanation. Muscles loosen. Thought slows. Consciousness prepares to withdraw and return, later altered but continuous. This daily return is the smallest echo of the cycles that shape worlds. You do not need to carry the weight of deep time with you. It carries itself. All that is asked is that you notice briefly that you are part of something older than certainty and quieter than fear. The reflection does not conclude the story. It releases it. Rest now. The earth will continue thinking in stone. The sky will continue moving in silence. And whatever intelligence comes next, whenever it comes, will ask the same question again, softened by time and answered not with certainty but with presence. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. The long passage through stone shadow and memory now begins to soften, as if the weight of deep time is finally being set down beside you. Nothing more needs to be carried forward. The path behind you has already done its work quietly, patiently, without asking to be held in the mind. You do not need to remember every idea, every layer, every question traced across these hours. The journey was never meant to be memorized. It has already slipped beneath awareness settling, where thoughts loosen and patterns drift. Like dust in still air, it has found its place without effort. What matters has been absorbed. What does not matter can dissolve. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Understanding is heavy. Rest is light. Deep time does not demand conclusions, only presence. You have listened long enough. Now the listening can end and the silence can take over steady and kind. Let gravity hold you. Let the questions fade. Feel the slow certainty of weight returning to the body, the quiet agreement between breath and ground. There is nothing left to resolve. The earth continues without instruction. The sky continues without witness. You are safe to let go. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again, "Sleep, traveller." The cosmos will keep watch.